Welcome, my family. Before we jump in, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. It helps me bring more spooky stories to you. Today, we're diving into Appalachia deep woods horror stories, things that'll make you think twice before heading into those woods. Trust me, you won't want to miss this. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Can't wait to hear from you all. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It wasn't just the usual quiet of the Appalachian woods. This felt wrong, heavy. There should have been birds. Maybe the wind rustling through the trees, the distant hum of insects. But there was nothing, just the thudding of my heart in my chest and my boots crunching through the dry underbrush. I'd been walking for hours. The trail barely more than a faint, overgrown line snaking through the dense trees, winding around moss-covered rocks and thick, twisted roots. The map I had was outdated, maybe even a little inaccurate, but it didn't matter. This was supposed to be a simple hike, just a weekend getaway from the noise of city life. A chance to clear my head, but now with the sunlight slipping away behind the hills, I was starting to wonder if I'd made a mistake coming out this far. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to close in. The trees stood taller here, their trunks thick and gnarled, their branches stretching out like hands reaching for something unseen. The air smelled damp and old, as if the forest had been here far longer than anyone cared to remember. And yet, despite the isolation, I felt watched. Not the way you might think, like someone was peering out from behind a tree or hiding in the shadows. No, it was more subtle, like the woods themselves were aware of my presence. I stopped for a moment, leaning against a rough boulder to catch my breath, when I heard it, footsteps, soft, tentative, like someone was walking just out of sight behind me. My stomach twisted. The trail was narrow, barely wide enough for me to walk, let alone someone else. The sound was unmistakable, though. Someone was following me. I turned, quickly scanning the trees behind me, but there was no one, just the same tangled wilderness, the same dim light flickering through the branches. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that it was just my mind playing tricks. I'd been on my own for hours, after all, and the isolation was starting to get to me, but the footsteps kept coming. Soft, like a whisper in the distance, just close enough to make my skin crawl, but not enough to reveal their source. I began walking faster, my pace quickening to match the rhythm of the steps behind me. The crunch of my boots in the dry leaves was almost deafening compared to the soft, muted steps of the stranger, or whatever it was, trailing me. Every so often, I'd turn to look, but I never saw anything, not even the trace of a shadow. I stopped again. This time I turned completely, my back pressed against a tree. My breath was ragged, my chest tightening with each passing second. I wasn't sure if it was fear or just exhaustion catching up with me, but the feeling of being watched was growing more intense by the minute. And then, just as I was about to call out, something broke the silence. A twig snapped, but it wasn't ahead of me. It was behind, closer now. My heart pounded in my throat, and I took a step back, my eyes darting through the trees. I couldn't see anything, nothing out of place, but the feeling of being followed didn't go away. If anything, it intensified, settling deep into my bones. I don't know how long I stood there, too terrified to move. The wind picked up, a low, eerie howl rushing through the branches above me, sending a chill across my skin. That was when I saw it. Footprints, not my own, but fresh ones, pressed into the soft earth just a few feet away from me. They were large, heavy prints, the kind that belonged to someone much taller than me. But there was something off about them. The way they were arranged, spaced just enough apart to suggest a deliberate, careful pacing, almost like they were being made to match my own. I stepped closer, my breath held tight in my chest, and squatted down, inspecting the ground. The soil was damp here, but the prints weren't filled with water, like they should have been. They were crisp, too clear, too fresh for how long I'd been walking. I swallowed, fighting the urge to look behind me again. Then I saw it. A small, crumpled piece of paper, wedged between two rocks nearby. It looked old, yellowed at the edges, but the ink on it was unmistakable. There, scribbled in a hand I couldn't recognize, was a single line. "You're not alone here." I froze. My mind raced as I scanned the area around me, but I saw nothing, no movement. Nothing but the oppressive silence that had settled in the woods like a thick fog. I had to leave. I knew that much. But as I turned, ready to make my way back the way I came, I caught something in the corner of my eye, a figure standing just at the edge of the trees, watching me. My breath hitched, and I stumbled backward, crashing into a bush behind me. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. But when I looked again, the figure was gone. I didn't waste any more time. I turned and ran, pushing through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. Every step felt heavier than the last, every crack of a twig underfoot sending a surge of panic through me. I didn't dare look back again, knowing deep down that the thing behind me would only get closer the more I looked. I ran until my legs burned, until I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. My head spun with the thought of those footprints, the figure watching me, and that message, "You're not alone here." Eventually, I stumbled upon an old, crumbling cabin. It looked abandoned. But I didn't care. I'd take my chances there. Even if it meant hiding behind rotting walls, I darted inside, slamming the door behind me, my chest heaving with exhaustion. The cabin smelled of mildew and decay, but it felt like safety. At least it should have. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The silence outside was unnerving, but worse was the sound of something scraping at the door. At first I thought it was just an animal, a raccoon maybe, but the sound kept coming, slow, deliberate, like someone or something was trying to get in. I don't know how long it went on, but eventually it stopped. The woods fell quiet again, but that didn't comfort me. Not anymore. When morning finally came, I made the decision to leave. But the moment I stepped outside, I froze. The footprints were still there. The same ones I had seen before, leading from the cabin, stretching back into the woods. I could have sworn they hadn't been there before. But now they were clear as day, and they were headed in the same direction I was. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. The trail I had followed in was gone, replaced by those heavy, deliberate steps. I didn't want to follow them. I didn't want to be anywhere near them, but somehow I knew I had no choice. I turned back, the woods stretching out in front of me like a dark, empty void, and I followed. The footsteps kept coming. It wasn't the kind of thing I'd planned to find. I wasn't looking for cabins or strange places, or anything that might make my skin crawl. But the storm came fast, and the wind started howling through the trees like a thing alive. I hadn't planned on being this far out. Not that day. But when I realized how badly the weather was turning, I knew I had no choice. I couldn't keep walking in the rain and mud for hours, not in the wilds of the Appalachian Mountains, not without risking more than just a cold or a twisted ankle. So when I saw it, a dilapidated shack barely visible through the thick pines, I thought I'd been saved. The cabin was tucked away in a hollow, far from any well-known trails. It wasn't much, just a small one-story structure with a sagging roof, missing a few shingles, and a darkened doorway. It looked like it hadn't seen a visitor in years, but it was shelter. And shelter was everything in the kind of weather that churned the sky above me into bruises of black and purple. I wasn't set in a position to be picky. The moment I stepped through the door, something felt wrong. The air inside was thick and stale, like it hadn't moved in a long time. The wood was damp. The floorboards creaked under my weight. I hesitated. There was something strange about the place, but I couldn't place it. I could have sworn I heard something shifting in the corner, just out of sight. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind or an animal, or my imagination. I made my way further into the cabin, my footsteps slow, deliberate. My breath was visible in the frigid air. The windows were cracked and boarded up, barely any light coming through. The only thing I could make out clearly was the fireplace, a black charred thing in the center of the room. I thought for a brief moment that I'd seen something move in the shadows beyond it, but when I turned, there was nothing. I forced myself to relax, to breathe steadily. After all, I was just tired, maybe a little rattled by the storm. It wasn't the first time I'd been stuck in a remote place during bad weather. It wouldn't be the last. I dropped my pack by the door and collapsed into a rickety chair near the hearth. The place was still, too still. But it wasn't until I looked closer at the walls that I felt the first genuine stirrings of unease. The room was sparse, with little furniture save the chair I sat in and a worn table against the far wall. But there was something hanging on the walls, something I hadn't noticed before. There were old photographs, faded pictures of people, families, maybe, but the faces were scratched out, every single one of them. I stood up, my legs stiff from the hike, and walked closer to inspect the photographs. The scratches weren't made with a knife or any tool that could be seen easily. No, these marks looked like they'd been made by someone's fingers smeared into the photo's surface, the lines deep and jagged. I shuddered. What kind of person would do that? Why? I could feel my pulse quicken, a cold feeling creeping up my spine, but I shook it off, reminding myself that these kinds of places, these backwoods cabins, had their own history, their own quirks. People did strange things out here, lived in isolation for too long. I went to the window to check the storm. The wind was picking up, rattling the frame with such force that it felt like the whole building would collapse. That steps when I heard it, a soft shuffling sound. Barely noticeable, but they're all the same. I froze. It came from behind me. I turned slowly, my heart beating harder now. The room was empty. Still, I stared at the shadows near the fireplace, but saw nothing. Maybe it was just the wind again. But then I saw it. A shape, a dark figure standing near the back corner of the cabin, just barely visible in the dim light. A person. Maybe, but too still, too silent. My breath caught in my throat. I wasn't just imagining things. Before I could move, the figure spoke in a voice so low and gravelly, it made my skin prickle. "You shouldn't be here." I opened my mouth to say something. Anything. But no words came. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. The figure didn't move, didn't shift. It just stood there, a silhouette in the dark. I realized then that it wasn't just the figure that felt wrong, it was the air, the silence, everything. I was just looking for shelter. I stammered, my voice weak. I didn't mean any harm. There was a long pause, so long I thought the figure might never respond, and then it did. A single chilling line that sent a rush of cold through my veins. "You said you're not supposed to be here." I took a step back, my legs trembling. I turned toward the door, ready to leave, to run if I had to. But when I reached for the handle, the door wouldn't open. I yanked on it, panic creeping into my chest. I was trapped. I heard a low chuckle behind me, the sound of it echoing through the walls like it came from deep inside the earth. I spun around, but the figure was gone, vanished as though it had never been there. The room felt smaller now, suffocating. I was alone, but I wasn't. I could feel something watching me, something lurking just out of sight, just beyond the shadows. My breathing quickened, my chest tight. I reached for my pack, desperate to leave, to escape. But the storm outside was worse now. The wind screamed against the cabin's walls like a wounded animal, and I truly realized that the storm wasn't the only thing keeping me here. Something else had kept me in this place. Something in the cabin, in the walls, in the very air. I didn't understand it at first. Not fully, but I was beginning to piece it together. The photographs, the scratched out faces, the silence, the figure in the corner, this cabin, this place. It wasn't just empty. It wasn't abandoned. It was waiting, and I wasn't the first to find it. Hours passed, though I couldn't be sure how many. Time lost. Meaning, the storm raged on outside, but it was the strange, shuffling sound that kept me from finding any rest. It echoed through the cabin, from one corner to the next, moving closer, always closer. I moved toward the corner where I had first seen the figure. I couldn't stop myself. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe I should have run while I had the chance. But I had to know. I had to understand what was happening in this place. The air grew colder as I approached the corner, so cold I could see my breath clouding in front of me. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and brushed the wall. It wasn't a wall at all. There was a door hidden in the corner, concealed beneath layers of grime and dirt. I tried to open it, but it was locked. Someone was behind it. I pounded on it, shouted for help, but the only response was that same low, guttural chuckle. And then I heard something else. A whisper, as if I'd been waiting. The ground beneath me shook as the cabin seemed to groan like it was alive, breathing. My heart pounded in my ears. I stumbled back, falling to the floor. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced. Should I run? Should I try to break the door down? But something held me there, a part of me too terrified to leave, too afraid to know what lay beyond the door. I don't know how long I sat there, frozen. But when the storm finally died down, when the wind stopped howling and the silence returned, I got up. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I made it to the door, and this time it opened. The mountain air hit me like a wave. As I stepped outside, my legs shaking beneath me. But even as I fled, as I descended the mountain, the whispers followed. They never stopped. And now, months later, I can still hear them sometimes. Late at night, when the wind howls just right, or when I'm alone in the woods, they still call my name. And I wonder what was waiting behind that door. And why did I ever think I could leave without knowing? I found a cabin in the Appalachians. It wasn't empty, and I don't think it ever will be again. I glanced back down the path, but there was nothing. Just the same thick, oppressive trees, their branches twisting like gnarled hands trying to reach for me. The trail I was on had no name, no markings, nothing but a few old blazes on the bark of some of the trees. I had come out here for solitude, seeking the peace of the mountains, but now I wasn't so sure I wanted to be here. The sense of being watched, followed. It felt real. The first snap of the twig caught my attention. Sharp, sudden, and too close for comfort. My breath caught, a shudder running through me. But I forced myself to keep walking. The old Appalachian trail I was following was little more than a forgotten path through the dense trees, swallowed up by shadows. The night had a suffocating quality to it, and the sky had long since closed in, obscured by the thick canopy above. Every crackle of leaves underfoot, every slight breeze seemed to amplify in the stillness. The snapping sound came again. This time, it was closer. I stopped, holding my breath, straining my ears to catch anything that might explain the noise. A wind? No, the air was still. I was alone here. At least I thought I was. But the forest had a way of playing tricks on your mind, making the shadows feel like something more than they were, making the rustling of the leaves feel like a presence, watching and waiting. The forest around me had always been known for its eerie atmosphere. Old-timers in the nearby town of Oak Hollow spoke of the Whistler, a figure who was said to wander these woods at night. Their presence marked by the strange sounds of twigs snapping and a faint whistling carried on the wind. They said it was no ordinary person, but something older, something born of the forest's deepest secrets. But those were just stories, right? local lore made up to keep people from straying too far into these woods, or so I thought. I pushed the unease aside and took a few more steps, trying to shake the feeling of someone or something behind me. Another snap. I froze again, heart racing. There it was, unmistakable. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. I wasn't alone. I whirled around, but there was nothing. The path was empty, the trees motionless in the silence that followed. My breath came in ragged gasps as I strained my ears. No more twigs snapping. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the tension in my chest only deepened, and I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes on me, the feeling that someone or something was just out of view, waiting. I started walking again, faster now, the pace almost frantic, but no matter how quickly I moved, the snapping followed. It was there, close behind me, as if someone was matching my steps, walking just out of my sight. My heart hammered in my chest, and I quickened my pace, breath coming in shallow bursts. It was then that I saw it. Up ahead, nestled in the trees, barely visible in the dim light, was a small clearing. In the center, a figure stood, tall and dark. I couldn't make out its features, but I could feel its presence, solid and unwavering. I stopped dead in my tracks, unable to move, unable to look away. The air felt thick, like it was pressing in from all sides. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, still as death, watching me with an intensity I could almost feel. My mouth went dry, my mind screaming at me to turn around, to run, but my legs refused to obey. I couldn't tear my eyes away, as if something in that moment held me in place, like I was trapped in the stare of something ancient and unfathomable. I blinked, just once, and in that brief moment it was gone. The clearing was empty. Nothing but the twisted, barren trees surrounding it. I looked around, heart racing, my pulse thrumming in my ears. There was no sign of the figure, no movement, just the quiet hum of the forest at night. Had I imagined it? Had I been seeing things in the dark, or had it been real? I couldn't say. The only thing I knew for sure was the sharp, unrelenting sound of twigs snapping behind me, closer now than ever. I turned to run, my feet moving before I even realized it. The path ahead was a blur, the darkness swallowing me whole. I could hear it, whatever it was, right behind me. The snapping of twigs, the heavy breath of something chasing me, growing closer with every step I took. I stumbled, my foot caught on something, sending me sprawling to the ground. The impact knocked the wind from my lungs, and for a moment I lay there, gasping for air, too terrified to move. The sound of twigs snapping was almost deafening now, each snap a sharp reminder that I wasn't alone. I was lost, and I wasn't stuck alone. The sound of twigs snapping came again, but this time it was louder, closer, almost like footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming toward me. I pushed myself up, desperation flooding my veins. There had to be something somewhere that could explain all this. I had to find shelter or a road or anything to break this madness. But when I looked up, the trees around me had changed. The path, once familiar, was gone. I was standing in a part of the forest I didn't recognize, a place I was sure I hadn't passed before. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches curving overhead like a canopy, blocking out the stars and the moon. I spun around, searching for a way out, but the forest felt like it was closing in on me, each direction leading deeper into the unknown. I could hear something else now too, a faint whistle carried on the wind, like the wind itself was calling to me, beckoning me to follow. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was listen to the whistle and the snapping of twigs and the slow, steady crunch of footsteps coming for me. I froze. The whistle was faint at first, but it grew louder, closer. It wasn't human. It couldn't be, but it was there, echoing through the trees, like something something that had always been here. And then, in the distance, I saw something. A light, flickering, like a candle in the darkness. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. My heart leapt. A cabin, a house, maybe someone who could help me. I started to run toward it, my legs moving on their own. I didn't need to turn around to know that it was too late. The light was gone, and in its place was the dark, unyielding void of the forest. And that whistle. That damn whistle. It was getting closer. But the sound of twigs snapping behind me stopped me cold. I couldn't escape. Not now. Not anymore. The twigs snapped once more, and in the dead of night the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen, something that I would never fully understand. I didn't look back again. I couldn't stat. The sound of my boots crunching on the dry, brittle leaves was the only thing breaking the silence. I didn't mind it at first. Nature has a way of making you feel like you're part of it, even when you're surrounded by miles of untouched wilderness. But now, that sound was grating, oppressive, and loud in the stillness of the Appalachian forest. I had been hiking for hours, well past the point where my map was any use. The paths weren't marked like they were supposed to be, and the landmarks didn't line up. There was something wrong about the place, something that made the air feel thicker, as if the trees themselves were closing in. The woods around me were dense. The pines and oaks stretched up so high they almost seemed to block the sky, casting deep shadows even though it was still early afternoon. The silence of the place was unsettling, suffocating. I hadn't heard a bird, not a single rustle in the underbrush, nothing but the soft whisper of the wind through the branches. It wasn't set right. I stopped walking, my breath coming a little too fast. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was supposed to be on a well-traveled trail, a part of the Appalachian trail system that even casual hikers used. So why did this place feel so wrong, so lonely? The kind of lonely that pressed against your chest and made you want to scream just to break the silence. I pulled out my phone. But of course, there was no signal. There never was. I should have known better. But I'd been too confident, too comfortable in my own skin. I wiped my brow, my fingers brushing the cold sweat from my forehead. The air was too still, too thick. My lungs felt heavy, and I noticed the scent of something sharp and decayed like wet earth and old pine resin. I should have turned back then. I should have listened to that feeling gnawing at me, the one that had been clawing at the back of my mind for the past few miles. I didn't stat though. I told myself it was just my nerves. I was just tired. It was easy to start doubting yourself when you were far from home, far from anything familiar. But as I kept walking, the unease settled deeper. It was like the woods were pressing in on me from all sides. The trees no longer felt like something to admire or respect. They felt like something alive, something that could see me, judge me. A scream pierced the air. I froze. It wasn't a human scream, though. It was the kind of scream that made your blood run cold, a shriek that didn't belong to anything in this world. The sound ripped through the quiet, echoing between the trees in a way that made my heart stutter. I wasn't the only one who had heard it. I saw a flash of movement in the trees ahead of me. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks, a trick of the shadows. But then the shape moved again, and I was certain I saw something or someone lurking in the underbrush just outside my view. I called out, "Hello, is someone there?" My voice was louder than I wanted it to be, but I couldn't help it. I needed someone to answer. Nothing. I waited, straining my ears for another sound, but the woods were still again, holding their breath, as if whatever it was that had screamed had faded back into the shadows. I wasn't sure if I should keep going or turn back. The path was growing harder to see, and the trees seemed to be getting thicker, their roots more tangled, a knot twisted in my stomach. I had to find shelter, or I would end up like one of those hiker stories they talked about at the trailhead. I kept moving, my legs aching, my mind refusing to let go of the feeling that something was wrong. The sun was starting to dip behind the ridge, casting long, twisting shadows on the trail. That's when I found it. A small cabin. It was barely visible through the dense foliage, as though the forest itself was trying to hide it. The logs were weathered, dark with age, but the roof didn't seem to be caving in like you'd expect of a forgotten, abandoned place. There was something odd about the structure. The windows were blacked out, the door slightly ajar, as if it hadn't been touched in years, but the hinges still creaked when the wind pushed against it. I approached cautiously. Something about the place didn't sit right in my gut, but I was exhausted, and the thought of spending another night out in the open, alone, in the freezing cold, was unbearable. I stepped up onto the porch, and the old wood groaned under my weight. The door swung open with a light push. Inside, the air was thick with dust, but there was something else too, something sharp and metallic in the air. The place smelled old, like the decay of forgotten memories. My flashlight flickered on, casting long shadows across the room. It was mostly empty, save for a few pieces of old furniture, a chair, a broken table, and a few shelves that had been stripped bare long ago. That sips when I saw it. Carved into the wall was something that made my stomach twist. A warning, written in deep gouges that had been made with something far too sharp, too deliberate. Get out. The letters were jagged, uneven, like they had been made by someone in a frenzy. My heart skipped a beat as I stepped closer. The scent of blood was thick now, and my hands trembled as I ran my fingers over the etching. A noise outside the cabin. I spun around, every muscle in my body screaming at me to leave. But when I reached the door, a figure stepped into the doorway. A man, dirty and ragged, wearing an expression that could only be described as haunted. His eyes were wide with terror, and the clothes he wore were tattered, like he'd been out here for months. Please. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. You can stay here. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Why? What happened? He stepped closer, his eyes darting around nervously. He didn't seem to see me. He was looking at something behind me, something that was closing in, something that was coming for us both. It's not safe. It's not safe here anymore. His hands trembled as he clutched the doorframe. His skin pale, his face gaunt. They find you too. He stumbled backward, as if something was pulling him back into the shadows. I reached for him, but before I could move, he disappeared into the trees, swallowed whole by the night. My breath came fast, panic rising in my chest. I turned to go back inside, but that's when I noticed it. On the floor, near the broken table, was a dark stain, a large, wet, sticky stain that hadn't been there when I first entered. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped closer, the light from my flashlight flickering. There was something else too, a piece of torn cloth, stained with what could only be blood, was half hidden beneath the table leg. My eyes locked on the object, and then it hit me. It was the same fabric as the man's shirt. The knot in my stomach twisted again, this time with more certainty. I wasn't alone, and whatever had come for him was still out there, waiting, watching. I didn't wait to see if it would come for me too. I bolted from the cabin, my heart pounding in my ears, my legs moving faster than they should have been able to. The woods seemed to close in around me, the trees shifting, creaking with an almost human-like intention. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get as far away from that cabin as possible. And then, the scream again, closer this time, like it was coming from right behind me. I didn't stop running. I don't remember how long I ran, but when the sun finally broke through the trees again, I was on a trail I recognized. I wasn't sure how I had gotten there, how I had made it through the night. The woods felt different now, like they were behind me, like I had escaped something, but the fear still clung to me, deep in my bones. The man had been real. The warning had been real. And that thing in the woods was still out there. I don't know if I'll ever be able to go back. I don't know if I ever want to. But I can still hear that scream, and I still don't know what it was. But it wasn't set human. The day had already begun to slip into an eerie twilight when I first heard it. It was a soft whistle, a melody that seemed too distant, too deliberate, like someone was trying to catch my attention from far off in the woods. I stopped walking, heart hammering against my ribs. There was something about the sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle, whistling out here, in this godforsaken stretch of the Appalachian backwoods. It wasn't right. I had been hiking alone for days now, deep into the forgotten parts of the mountains, far from any trailheads, any signs of human life. Just me and the wilderness. It was the kind of isolation that gnawed at your nerves, the kind of quiet that made you feel like you were being watched. And now this whistling cutting through the silence like a razor. It was too rhythmic, too perfect. Not the kind of thing an animal would make. Not the kind of thing I'd ever heard before. My first instinct was to keep moving, to pretend I hadn't heard it, but the whistle came again. Louder this time, clearer. It seemed to be in front of me. No, to the side, just out of my line of sight, behind a tangle of trees, or maybe a ridge. I wasn't sure. I stood there frozen, listening, trying to figure out if it was just the wind, a trick of the mountains, but the air was still, silent. Then the whistle came again. It was faint, like it was drifting from somewhere beyond my reach, but unmistakable. Someone, or something, was out there. I had read the warnings, the stories about the people who went into these parts and didn't come back, about the things that haunted these woods, things that weren't entirely human but weren't entirely animal either. People whispered about the hollow folk, strange spirits who watched from the dark places, their eyes glinting like wet stones. Or worse, things that pretended to be people, things that could mimic voices, that could take your shape if they wanted. I shook my head, forcing myself to ignore it. I wasn't the superstitious type. This was just the isolation playing tricks on me. A strange sound carried on the wind. I had read all about it in the books I'd brought. The ones about the old Appalachian folklore, the legends of things that were better left forgotten. I took a few steps forward, my boots crunching against the dry leaves, my breath shallow as I tried to steady myself. But then, I heard it again. The whistling, closer now. Too close. It wasn't just the wind. It wasn't a trick of my imagination. I turned around, scanning the shadows beneath the canopy. Nothing but trees, their branches twisted and gnarly like skeletal hands reaching out of the earth. The forest was alive with rustling leaves, the hum of insects, the occasional creak of a branch shifting. But in that moment, all I could hear was the whistle. It came again, short bursts of high-pitched notes, like a song someone might hum to themselves. I couldn't take it anymore. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end, my heart pounding in my throat. I was supposed to be alone out here. I'd come this far to escape people, to be alone with my thoughts. But someone was out there, whistling, waiting for me to react. I forced myself to move, my legs shaky as I continued on the path, the whistle following me. The sound now unmistakably deliberate. It wasn't a random noise. It was a call. I knew the stories. People disappearing, voices calling from the woods at night, only for their bodies to be found days later, twisted in unnatural positions, eyes wide open with terror. But none of those tales had ever seemed real to me. Not until now. The trees around me began to feel closer, as if they were pressing in, closing me off from the world. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to focus on the path, to ignore the creeping dread pooling in my stomach, but the whistle came again. I stopped dead in my tracks, my chest tight, the silence after it almost suffocating. Then a voice. It wasn't the whistle anymore, but a voice, clear and soft, just out of reach. It was a woman's voice. "Come here." I felt my blood run cold. No, no one was out here. I was alone. The voice, it had to be a trick. I wanted to shout, to scream, to turn and run, but something held me in place. Something kept me rooted to the spot, as though the air itself had thickened and was pressing down on me. "Come here, child." The voice came again, but this time it was different. There was a familiarity to it, a warmth that made the hairs on my arms stand up, and I hated it. I turned around, my eyes scanning the trees, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing, just shadows and the deepening twilight. I had to move. I couldn't stand still. My feet moved without thinking, each step louder in the silence of the forest. The whistle was gone now, replaced by that voice, faint but persistent. I wasn't sure if I was being led somewhere, or if I was just running in a blind panic. Either way, I had to get out of there. I found a narrow trail and followed it, hoping to find some kind of landmark, something that could guide me back to the main trail. The shadows grew longer, darker. The trees felt like they were shifting around me, their branches creaking in the wind. I could hear my own heartbeat now, each thump rattling my chest. And then crack. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around, breath caught in my throat. My eyes darted to the trees, to the shadows that seemed to stretch and sway unnaturally. I saw nothing, but the sound had been clear. There was someone out there, someone following me. I wasn't stuck alone. I began to run. My feet slapped against the ground, twigs and branches snagging at my clothes as I pushed through the underbrush. The forest was alive with sounds now, rustling leaves, cracking branches, distant animal calls, and the sound of my own breath echoing in my ears. And then, as I rounded a bend, I saw something, a figure, standing just at the edge of the trail, almost hidden by the trees. I couldn't make out their face, but their shape was unmistakable. A person, tall and thin, dressed in tattered clothes that blended into the forest around them. They stood motionless, as if they were waiting for me. I froze, my heart in my throat, my body screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The figure didn't move either. We just stood there, staring at each other across the gap. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. There was no rustle of leaves, no sound of movement. 1 second it was there, and the next it was gone, swallowed up by the forest. I was shaking now, my knees weak, and I didn't care if I was being followed or if the woods were closing in on me. I don't know how long I ran for, but when I finally stopped, breathless and dizzy, I found myself at the edge of a clearing. It wasn't the trail, not the way I had come. I didn't recognize it. There, in the center of the clearing, was an old cabin. It looked abandoned, with rotting wood and broken windows. I could have sworn it hadn't been there when I passed earlier, but now it loomed in front of me, a silent, ominous presence. I didn't want to go near it. I didn't want to get any closer, but the voice, the whistle, they were both pulling me toward it. As I stepped into the clearing, the air around me grew thick with a sense of wrongness. Something was off here, something I couldn't explain, but it was undeniable. The cabin wasn't empty. I could feel it in the air, the presence of someone, something. I don't know what happened next. My mind feels hazy when I try to remember. All I know is that I didn't go inside. I turned and I ran, and I didn't stop running until I was out of the woods. I don't know who or what I saw in those woods. I don't know if it was human or something else, but the whistle, the voice, they still echo in my head. I heard someone whistling in the woods, but no one was there. And I never forget it. Did I really hear it? Or was it something else entirely? That's the question that haunts me now. The fog was so thick I could barely see my boots through it. It hung heavy in the trees, creeping through the underbrush like it had a mind of its own. It wasn't natural. This was no morning mist. It was the kind of fog that made everything feel wrong, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I knew I was in trouble as soon as I stepped off the trail. I should have turned back then. But I didn't. I never do. The trail had led me here, deep into the Appalachian Mountains, to the kind of solitude I'd always craved. But there was something else in the air. Something I couldn't place. An odd stillness. The kind of silence that wraps around you, suffocating any sound, even your own breath. It was unnatural, like the forest was holding its secrets close, whispering them to itself, but not letting me in. My GPS had failed an hour ago. Not that I relied on it much. Being off the beaten path was exactly why I'd come, to disconnect. But when it started acting up, I thought nothing of it. I wasn't the first to get lost out here, and I wouldn't be the last. But now, standing in this heavy fog, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and pine, I was starting to feel uneasy. I pulled my jacket tighter around me. Though it did little to shield me from the creeping chill, there was something off about this place. Something ancient. The trees here were twisted, their gnarled roots creeping out of the ground like hands trying to grasp at me. I could almost hear them groaning, as if they were alive and resentful of my presence. The wind had died down, leaving only the faintest rustle of leaves. But it wasn't the comforting kind of forest sound. It was the kind that makes you check over your shoulder, the kind that makes your heart beat a little faster. The weight of it was heavy. I could feel the pull, like the earth itself was trying to drag me under, to keep me here. I shook my head, trying to dispel the thought. It was just the isolation, the exhaustion, getting to me. I kept walking, my footsteps muffled by the dense carpet of moss beneath my feet. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. The woods were still, but the silence was too thick. I pushed on, despite the creeping doubt gnawing at my mind. It was getting late. Too late. The shadows were stretching longer, the sun struggling to break through the thick canopy. The fog was only growing thicker, swirling around me, turning the woods into something foreign. I knew I needed to turn back, to find the trail, but I couldn't bring myself to. Then I saw it. A structure barely visible through the fog. A cabin. It was so old it looked like it might crumble to dust if the wind blew too hard. The roof sagged in places, and the walls were covered in moss and vines. My pulse quickened. A cabin out here, alone in the mountains? I should have turned around right then, but curiosity pulled me closer. There was something about it that felt wrong. Not in a way that could be explained, but in a way that made my skin crawl. The way the fog wrapped around it, making it look like it was just a part of the earth itself, growing out of the ground like some twisted fungus. I approached cautiously, my boots crunching against the dry leaves beneath me. The air grew colder, and the smell of rotting wood and decay hit me like a punch. I reached for the door, hesitant, but unable to stop myself. The knob turned easily, the door creaking open with a protesting sound that echoed through the dead silence. Inside was a single room. A fireplace, long since extinguished, stood at one end, its stone chimney blackened with soot. Old furniture, some of it broken, was scattered around the room. A table, covered in dust and cobwebs, sat near the center. A rocking chair, its wood warped with age, creaked back and forth in the corner. But there was no sign of life. No signs that anyone had been here recently, or ever. I felt it again, the eyes on me. I wasn't stepped alone. I stepped further inside, my breath catching in my throat. The air inside was stale, suffocating, and there in the corner was something that made my blood run cold. A note, crumpled, stained with age, sitting on the floor by the broken rocking chair. I bent down, my fingers trembling as I unfolded it. Leave. The woods don't forget. The words were jagged, written in something that looked too dark to be ink. My stomach churned, a wave of nausea rising up in me. I didn't want to stay here. I didn't want to be anywhere near this place. but the door had closed behind me with a soft thud, and when I tried to turn the knob, it wouldn't budge. The air seemed to grow thicker around me, suffocating. The fog outside was creeping in, curling through the cracks in the walls, bringing the stink of the forest with it. I reached for the window, my breath quickening. The wood was thick with years of rot, the glass grimy with filth. I tried to push it open, but it wouldn't move. I was trapped. A sound broke the silence. A scraping noise, like something moving across the floor behind me. I whipped around, but the room was empty. The rocking chair continued to creak, but no one was there. My mind raced, my heart hammering in my chest. I wasn't stuck alone. Then, I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, uneven, just at the edge of my hearing. Someone or something was in the woods outside. I could feel their presence, feel them watching. And then, a whisper, barely audible. But it was there. "You shouldn't instead have come." I froze. My body went cold. Every muscle tensed. I turned back to the door, my fingers frantic as I twisted the handle again. It wouldn't open. The door had been locked from the outside. Panic set in. I hammered against the door, screaming, but the sound didn't reach anyone. It felt as though the woods had swallowed the noise, just as they had swallowed everything else. A loud crack echoed through the room. My eyes shot up. The ceiling beam above the door was splintering, bending under some unseen force. I stepped back, my heart in my throat, as a figure appeared in the doorway. A man, or something like a man. He was tall, impossibly tall, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were wide and hollow, black pits that seemed to swallow the light around them. His clothes were ragged, old, stained with something dark. Blood. He didn't speak. He just stood there staring at me with those empty eyes. "You should have listened." I didn't need to hear more. I turned and ran, slamming into the wall beside the door as I tried to escape. My mind was racing. The woods were closing in. I scrambled for the window again, desperation pushing me forward. It cracked open with a groan. I shoved myself through it, scraping my arms on the jagged wood. The fog had grown thicker, almost choking me, but I didn't care. I ran, blindly, stumbling through the dense undergrowth, tripping over roots and branches. I could still hear him behind me, the sound of his slow, deliberate steps crunching through the forest. But I made it. Eventually, I broke free of the woods, the fog parting just enough to let me see the distant lights of a cabin far down the mountain. I had no idea how I got so far, but I was out. I was safe. At least that's what I told myself. But the woods, they still had their grip on me. Even now, back in the city, I can't shake the feeling that they're watching, waiting. The fog follows me in my dreams, and every time I hear a creak or a whisper in the silence, I know that whatever was out there, whatever I saw, it's not done with me. I don't go into the mountains anymore. But I wonder if it was ever about me at all. Maybe it was the woods that wanted me. Or maybe it was just the thing that lives in them. And that thing, it still has its secrets. I hadn't planned to stay in that godforsaken part of the Appalachian woods. The cabin I rented was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, away from the noise, away from people. The brochures had promised solitude, quiet nights under the stars, a few streams and trails to hike. But what they didn't tell me was that there was a reason this area was so forgotten, so isolated. I should have known better. I should have asked more questions, but I didn't. When I arrived, the sun had already begun to dip behind the mountains, casting the whole valley in an oppressive shadow. The air felt thick, like it was pushing against me, weighing down on my chest. My phone had no signal, and the road that led to the cabin was barely more than a dirt path, overgrown with tangled brush and tree roots. It wasn't the scenic getaway I'd imagined. It was forgotten, abandoned, and raw. The perfect place for a fresh start. Or so I thought. The cabin itself was small, weathered, its porch sagging with age. It looked like it hadn't been cared for in decades. The door creaked loudly as I entered, and the smell of damp wood and dust hit me like a slap in the face. The floors creaked under my feet, and the place was colder than it should have been, even for a mountain retreat. I didn't mind. I was here to be alone, to clear my head. I unpacked my bags, set up my things, and tried to ignore the strange unease creeping up my spine. The place felt wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint why. Later that evening, I ventured out for a walk. The sun was long gone now, leaving only the pale light of the moon to guide me. The woods around the cabin were dark, suffocating, with only the occasional sound of distant birds or the rustling of leaves. The further I walked, the more the world seemed to narrow, until the trees felt like they were pressing in on me, crowding me from every side. That's when I saw him. An old man standing at the edge of the woods, his silhouette barely visible in the dark. He wore a tattered jacket and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. For a moment, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. But then he spoke. "You shouldn't set be here." His voice was rough, like gravel scraping against stone, and it froze me in place. I wanted to turn around, run back to the cabin, but something about the way he spoke rooted me to the ground. It was like he knew something I didn't, something I should have known. "I'm sorry?" I managed to stammer. He didn't set to answer right away. Instead, he just stood there watching me with an unsettling stillness. Then finally, he said, "You don't stet belong here. You set made a mistake." A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't the cold mountain air. It was something else. I felt a sinking sensation in my gut, like the ground beneath me was giving way. But I forced myself to speak. "I'm just passing through," I said. "I'm renting the cabin up there for a few days." The man didn't move, didn't acknowledge my words. He just kept watching me, his head slightly tilted, like he was trying to figure me out. "I seen people like you before," he said slowly. "All lost, all running from something." His voice dropped lower, barely audible now, "and none of them ever leave." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I took a step back, feeling the panic rise in my chest. "What do you mean? Who are you?" "I know you," he muttered, almost to himself. "I know why you stir here." I couldn't breathe. The hairs on my neck stood on end, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. How could he know anything about me? How could he know what brought me here? Before I could say anything else, he turned and vanished into the woods without a sound. His figure melted into the darkness like he had never been there at all. I stood frozen for a long time, staring into the blackness where he had been, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. But the weight in my chest told me it hadn't been a hallucination. I had to get back to the cabin. I turned and walked briskly, not looking back, not allowing myself to stop and question what had just happened. When I reached the cabin, I slammed the door behind me and locked it. The wind howled outside, the trees shaking and groaning. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The man's words echoed in my mind. "You've made a mistake." I tried to calm myself, to convince myself it was just some crazy old man rambling in the woods. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. There was something about that place, something off about the air, the ground, the trees, and the man had known too much. I lay awake that night, the silence in the cabin suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the leaves outside sent my heart racing. My thoughts kept returning to the man's words. None of them ever leave, and I had no idea what that meant. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that I was being watched, that the woods were watching. I had planned to stay for 3 days. Now I wasn't so sure I'd make it through the night. The day I first arrived in the Appalachian Mountains, I thought I had found peace. The kind of quiet only deep, forgotten places can offer. No hum of traffic, no noise but the rustle of leaves and the creak of old trees. I'd been craving solitude after the stress of city life, the constant buzz of emails and obligations. The cabin I rented was tucked away in a remote part of the forest, miles from the nearest road, surrounded by thick pines and tangled underbrush. I had to take a narrow dirt path to get there, and even that was barely a trail. I had been warned. Everyone I talked to in the town at the foot of the mountains told me the same thing. You should leave. There's something set about that place. People been talking set about it for years. Best you don't set go up there at all. But I wasn't one to be easily swayed. There was something almost too perfect about the place. The isolation, the stillness. I needed to be alone, to think, to reset. I didn't believe in the stories. Not really. I should have listened. It started that night, just after dusk. I was unpacking my things when I first heard it. A shuffle, soft at first, then heavier, like something dragging its feet through the underbrush. It wasn't the wind. There was no breeze, and the trees were still. The silence of the woods had grown too thick. My skin prickled with a sensation I couldn't quite name, but I ignored it, telling myself it was just the unfamiliarity of the place. I tried to distract myself, lighting the old wood stove, making a cup of tea, but the sounds continued. Slow, deliberate. They came from deeper in the woods, just beyond where the trees began to thicken into shadows. My instincts told me to leave, to get in the truck and drive back to the town. But I couldn't. The idea of leaving felt foolish, as if I was being irrational. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was close, just out of sight. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, a bear maybe, or a deer, something that might have wandered too close. But the dragging sound wasn't like the hooves or paws of an animal. No, this was deliberate, methodical. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the wind against the trees sent my heart racing. When the footsteps came again, I couldn't sit still anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and my jacket and stepped outside, my boots crunching in the frost-covered ground. The air was thick with the smell of wet leaves and damp earth, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows. I shone the beam of light toward the tree line. But all I saw were the shadows of trees swaying, their branches like skeletal hands reaching toward me. I called out, thinking maybe it was someone, another hiker, maybe someone else who had gotten lost. "Hello?" I shouted, my voice shaky. "Is someone out there?" No answer, just the shuffling, getting closer. My heart hammered in my chest as I stumbled back toward the cabin. I felt a coldness on the back of my neck, like something was right behind me, just out of view. My breath came in short, frantic gasps, and I whipped around, shining the flashlight in all directions. Nothing. Only the endless stretch of trees, the whispering darkness. That night, I locked every door and shuttered every window. I stayed awake, listening, but nothing else came. No more footsteps, no more dragging sounds. The silence pressed against my ears like a heavy weight. It wasn't until the first light of dawn that I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next day, I tried to put it out of my mind. Maybe I had been imagining things, or maybe the forest had played tricks on me, but the uneasy feeling didn't go away. It gnawed at me, digging deeper into my chest with every passing hour. I spent the day hiking, hoping the physical exertion would clear my mind. The farther I walked, the more isolated I felt. The trees here were ancient, gnarled and twisted, their trunks covered in thick moss. Every so often I would hear a crack or a rustle from somewhere off the trail, but when I turned, I saw nothing. By evening, I returned to the cabin, exhausted but still on edge. The sky had turned a bruised purple, and the first stars were starting to appear. The shadows of the forest stretched longer and darker, and the unease inside me was building, thickening, as if something unseen was pressing in. It was then I noticed it. A figure in the distance. At first, I thought it was just another trick of the light, some shadow cast by the trees. But when I looked again, it was still there, standing between two large boulders. A man. He was wearing a worn jacket and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured his face. His stance was strange, stiff, as if he were waiting for something or someone. I froze. The figure didn't move, didn't react in any way, just stood there like a sentinel watching. I didn't dare call out this time. I knew better. My legs refused to move as my heart pounded in my chest, and after what felt like an eternity, the figure slowly turned and vanished into the trees. The footsteps started again that night. Louder this time, closer, dragging, scraping, as though something was making its way through the underbrush with deliberate slowness. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the fear crawled under my skin, tightening with each passing minute. I couldn't stay in the cabin another night. The isolation was too much, the dread too real. I grabbed my bag, my keys, and rushed out into the cold night, the flashlight trembling in my hand. I had no idea where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. I didn't make it far, just a few hundred yards into the woods before I stopped. Out of breath, heart hammering in my chest. The darkness was swallowing me whole, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps behind me, unmistakable, getting closer. Not just from one direction, but from all sides. They were circling me. I wasn't set alone. I turned and ran, my legs pumping hard against the uneven ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The footsteps followed, steady, unrelenting. I tripped, fell to my knees, and when I looked up, I saw it. A cabin, hidden in the trees, nearly invisible. Its windows were dark, but smoke curled from the chimney. I ran toward it, desperate. But as I neared, I hesitated. Something felt wrong. The cabin wasn't on any map. No trail led to it. The town hadn't mentioned it. I didn't know whose cabin it was, or who might be inside, but I had no choice. I pounded on the door, my heart in my throat. The footsteps were too close now, too real, too suffocating. The door creaked open, slowly, and I was face to face with the man I had seen earlier. His face was hidden by shadows, his body rigid, unmoving. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as he said, "You shouldn't have come here." I wanted to run, but my legs were frozen. "Please, let me in," I begged, my voice barely above a whisper. He studied me for a long moment before stepping aside. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. The fire in the hearth was nearly gone, just a few embers left glowing weakly. The man shut the door behind me, locking it with a single, deliberate click. "The footsteps," I said. "Finally. I hear them every night. They said you're getting closer. Who is it? What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just stared at me, his face pale in the dim light. Then he spoke, and his voice seemed to carry the weight of years of forgotten knowledge. "You heard the old stories," he said. "You heard the warnings. They follow everyone who stays here." I didn't instead understand. Who? What follows? He took a long breath, then simply said, "The mountain never forgets." It was then that I realized what had been chasing me, what had been circling the cabin. It wasn't just the footsteps, it was the mountain, reaching out to claim me. I don't remember much after that. The darkness took me, and when I woke, I was back at the foot of the mountain. The cabin was gone. The man was gone. The forest was silent again, as if nothing had ever happened. I drove back to the town, never looking back. But even now, years later, I still hear the footsteps sometimes, late at night when I'm alone. When the silence grows too thick, and I know they'll come for me again. They always do.